Hey, everybody. This is Larry Johnson. I guess I'm president now of the Eight Principles, not CEO anymore. That's another story. But I have with me is a really wonderful guest, Hillel Korin, who I've known now for at least 2 or 3 years. I'm losing track. But Hillel has a long history in fund development. I think he started out in higher ed in some ways like I did. He back in the East at Brandeis, right, Hillel? You were
Right,
at
right.
Brandeis, and so we share some common, excuse me, commonalities in that regard. Let me do this. Hold on. Mm, mm. Wow. Anyway, and I wanted to have him on again because it's been a while since we've talked, and I know he was getting used to a new community there in Phoenix. And I have a feeling it's pretty different than the Boston area. That's my guess, anyway. Um, and so, and then he just recently finished going through another cohort with eight principles. And by the way, as a result of that, Hillel, we're going to be making even more improvements on it. So, anytime you want to go through it again, just give us a heads up. We'll make room for you. So, anyway, so Hillel, um, Corinne Associates, how long have you been in fund development?
Well, I really come by this from a family perspective. My dad, who was an educator, got plucked out of the booming metropolis of Manchester, New Hampshire, where he was an educational director at a Jewish community center and was found there by the founding president of Brandeis University. And so Abe Sacker found him there, brought him to Boston. And my father had gone to Boston University and what was then, back in those days, a place called the Hebrew Teachers College, which has now got another name, and brought him in to be a fundraiser. And so after graduating Brandeis and growing up watching my dad as a fundraiser, I said, "What am I going to do?" I didn't want to go to law school, and so I actually got hired the first time at Brandeis and spent a year there. And then a friend of mine introduced me to. Right after the 73 Middle East War, introduced me to um, the director of development at the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, which is Boston's Jewish Federation, the oldest in the country. And that started my career there, where I spent years doing annual fundraising and then had the opportunity to build a community campus. So and then after doing that, I had gone to graduate school and gotten a degree at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, where they have a School of Jewish Communal Service. And a classmate of mine, really a year behind me, said, "Why don't you come work with me at my consulting business?" And that's where I started to go into consulting. And the way we worked it was I subcontracted. So I started a little consulting business called Korin Development Associates and led me to doing projects around the country, both in higher ed, independent schools, community centers, and really started doing some coaching because when you come in as a consultant, you have to coach and work with existing staff in many cases. And I still actually work with him. He's got a new group called Amplify Partners, which is really a bunch of former community professionals, and there are guys all over the country who we all do work for them at certain points in time. And that led me to learning about the eight principles.
Okay. Well, let me rewind a minute because you touched on something. I'm a, well, we come out of similar backgrounds in some ways. Your dad just got plucked out of what he was doing and said, "Here, I want you to be a fundraiser." And so he sort of learned it, just kind of, okay, I'll pick this up. And then when you and I became fundraisers, it maybe was a little more regimented, but really still wasn't. It was like, do you have the right people skills? Here, we'll teach you how to do this. And that's the way you do it. Now, fast forward all those years, and both of us see all of these plethora of academic programs and such that presume to teach you how to do this. um, I'm a little dubious about that. Tell me about some of the youngsters you've met. Are they just, is it just what they've learned from a program, or is there some sense of emotional intelligence? What are you seeing?
Well, I think what I've seen is a whole different um, mindset coming into the field now from when I got in and when many of my colleagues and friends got into the business. Most of us, in the end of the world that I tend to play in more than other aspects of it, came in because of a commitment to uh, building community and building um, resilience and the opportunity to serve. And so when if I'm sitting here in my little space in my apartment, and when I look at what um, my degree from HUC says, it says your degree is in Jewish communal service. Today, it's not called that, but we really saw ourselves as serving the community. And today, I think it's called Jewish professional service. And so, if you look at the different programs around the country, there are 7 or 8 or 9 of them between the different religious movements, and many of them affiliated with schools of social work. So whether it's at YSU, that's a uh, has a program, or University of Maryland and Baltimore Hebrew College has a program, Spertus in Chicago has a program. There, it's really changed the dynamic because those people coming in now, who many of my colleagues teach because they serve as adjunct faculty, focuses much more on the notion of professionalizing the field and building relationships with the donors. And when I first came in, it was all about how much money can you extract out of the industry. And it wasn't until after I was already in the field for 10 years or so where we began to learn about, oh, it's the donor. It's about building relationship. But that's really what my dad did.
Yeah.
And that's really how Brandeis got built because if you look back, there's a wonderful history that Abe Sacker wrote called "The Host at Last," and because that's what Brandeis University was, it was a host to those students who couldn't get into other schools because of quotas. And what Abe taught me was to worry about the donor and your relationship with the donor. And if you think about that, and you think about the 8 principles and what we learn in the 8 principles, it's really about listening and building that relationship so that you can maximize what that donor wants to accomplish.
Perfect.
And and that's what. So if you read A Host at Last, and there are 2 versions of the book, what you learn about is how he built the relationship with donors around the country. and around communities, and he traveled all over the place. And what I always took away from my meetings with him was that it wasn't about how much was the donor going to give you for that wing of a building, but what was important to the donor and why did he want to support that element? And I laugh sometimes when I talk to younger people and talk to people coming into the field, and I tell them, I know this sounds trite, but it's the donor, stupid. Hear what the donor has to say,
Yeah.
and that will give you the roadmap.
Well, I'm glad that you said that. Thank you. Thank you. So then, in that regard, the eight principles became sort of a natural place for you.
It 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 was what the eight principles did for me, and what it continues to do for me, and I think it does for you, and whatever you decide to do, is that it teaches you to listen and to ask the right questions. So if you think about principle one, begin at the beginning and start from the inside out. It's all about not so much you and who you're working for. It's about, can you find the connection? And so I come out of a background of that really grew on in the early years, and in the Jewish Federated world, it was all about peer-to-peer solicitation.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And it was, do you have the right real estate developer who may have three other partners talking to the right other real estate developers, or talking to his lawyer about making a commitment? And there was a fair amount of arm twisting.
Oh, how
And
about I must tell you a story. You arm twisting. All right. Well, I'm Gentile, so I'm not totally in sync. I don't know all about the Jewish world. However, I was back when I was working for the consulting firm years ago. I was working on a synagogue campaign, and I accompanied these two gentlemen I forget, to another man's office, and they were going to solicit him for his commitment to this campaign. And so I'm sitting there because I'm not going to do the asking or anything. I'm just sort of sitting there providing support. And at one point, one of the two gentlemen that went with me, the guy's name that we were talking, I think his name was Jacob, and he takes this piece of paper and he slides it across the desk to this man, and he says, "Jacob, that's your number. We're not leaving till we get it." Whoa. I mean, that's what I call, that's hardball fundraising. And I'm thinking,
yeah,
okay, I'm in a different world now. And of course, they got it. They got what they were asking for. And, the Jewish community is very tight. There's a lot of connections there. So that was one of the reasons I think they were able to be successful with something like that. But that was the first time I ever saw that kind of approach, Hillel. It wouldn't be
well, I that I don't think that would happen today.
well, that's good.
And I think that today you would say, it could. I still do some of those solicitations. In fact, I was just on the phone trying to close a commitment for a trauma program in Israel, and I actually got someone to answer the phone, and I said to this woman, she was in Tucson, and I said, Francis, would you consider a commitment this year? And she said, "Oh, what a nice way of asking." And, 20 years ago, we would have walked into her house and said, "Francis, we're here to ask you for your gift to the annual campaign. Um, we'd like you to give $25,000." And she might have said yes, she might not have, but I would say, based on the way we like to do it today, and based on really what the eight principles teaches.
Hmm.
It's not only how you ask, it's the way you ask and how you respond. And I think that that's really what this why this is so important, because it your cause, and in the world that I worked in for so many years, there are lots of great organizations competing for those dollars. So it's all about making that, finding what that connection is between the person you're speaking with and what they really want their legacy and their thinking to be, and how they want to be considered part of the community. And you know, if you ask for and twist that arm, you might get it, but you might never get another commitment.
That's right. That's how you're burning your bridge while you're in there.
And so you're ultimately leaving money in the table.
Yes.
And I'm sure that we could swap lots of war stories where you walked in, did a solicitation, right? You may have gotten the gift, but it's not sustainable, and you're not going to get it the second time. So what did you leave on the table?
Yeah.
And I think,
I call that the hush and go away gift. Here, I've done
yeah,
my part. Don't come back. Um,
right,
and that's
right.
when the focus is on the short term, on the amount, not the connection, not the
Right.
reason. These things that will determine that level of real compassion and that real investment. So, now, are you still pretty much confining your practice to Jewish organizations? Hello.
Well, I do mostly Jewish organizations. Occasionally, I'll go and I'll speak and I'll talk to other organizations here in Phoenix. There's no lack of philanthropy here in Phoenix, and there's certainly no lack of opportunity. It's hard to get into the general community here. One of the things that sort of um, um, characterizes what I found in Phoenix is that people are very insular, and they sort of tend to stay in their silos. And one of the challenges, of course, in the Jewish community is that um, there are everybody in Phoenix, not everybody, but lots of people in Phoenix will tell you, as I'm sure they do in other places, that you know, I'm a Chicagoan. I, my whole family is Chicago, and I still support organizations in Chicago because that's where we go back to. And you know, it's like when I was in Boston and we were doing the campaign, we used to have to split gifts with Palm Beach, because people would people would announce, I'm giving, you know, to the Jewish community, I'm giving $100,000, but what they weren't telling you was, you know, 75 was going in Palm Beach and 25 was still going in Boston, or vice versa, and that kind of thing, because nobody felt the commitment. So and we knew that in a place like Phoenix, because although I've only lived here for 5 years or so, um, my former mentor, and I think everyone needs mentors,
Yes.
but who really taught me about fundraising and building relationships, became the executive director of the Jewish community here. And they built a campus similar to what he and I had built in Boston. And so I knew what Phoenix was all about and what Scottsdale was all about, and the challenges that existed here. And it takes sometimes a generation till people feel like they're really part of the community, and building the strength of that organization. So it's a challenge, and I think that Phoenix has a lot of great places and great opportunities. What it has, though, is a huge influx of people from California, and so that is making it. It's forcing it to respond to needs that are different than what it originally set out to be. So there's not a lack of opportunity, but there's really not the same commitment yet, and it may take another few years
Okay.
to get people to really, not so much that they won't give, but to really understand that philanthropy is based on where you and who you relate to and where you really want to make and leave your own mark.
Hmm. Yeah, just to really understand where those connections are, to feel
Right.
comfortable with those. And because, yeah, that's true. Phoenix is pretty much what's the word? An in-migration community. I mean,
Right.
and then of course now we're getting the influx of Californians here in Idaho too. Not altogether welcome, I might add. Hello. You're in
Yeah.
Idaho, for instance. But
As I was driving home last night after dropping my daughter off at her hotel, I was sort of looking around, and thank God for GPS because I had not been out to where she is. And I said, and so I spoke to her early this morning. I said, no, it's like the Wild West out there. All you see is cows and uh, empty fields and buildings going up and houses and apartments. And she said, yeah, that's where all the ball players come after they retire. They either come to Phoenix or they go to Florida,
okay.
because they want to be in the warm weather.
Hmm.
And you see an entirely different crowd here, by the way. If you come here in February, March, before the season starts, you see all the snowbirds who come here so they can go to spring training. But they're not, they're not really part of the community. They may be here. My former in-laws are here, and they started coming, for 3 weeks and 6 weeks, and then they became permanent residents and from the east, from Philadelphia, and because my father-in-law realized he could run his business from anywhere with computers, and so they've now become um, rooted in the community and involved. And but if you ask them, they're going to tell you that they still have to give back in Philadelphia because of relationships that they have there.
It takes a while. It takes a while. It really.
Yeah.
Um, so, where do you see yourself going, Hillel? You're just now making these connections. You've been there about 5 years. What would you? What's the ideal job for you? Ideal client? In this general, what would be an ideal client for you?
Well, so the ideal client for me would be a medium-sized organization that needs to raise $5 to $8 million a year, and but doesn't have the requisite framework and foundation to build on. It has some committed volunteers and some committed donors, but doesn't have and doesn't really have has an ED that will do fundraising, but reluctantly,
Reluctant.
and but is open to being coached and to listen. And so my goal is to really partner with those kinds of organizations and help them build sustainable fundraising models, and so that their campaigns and we're instead, and I love going out and talking to donors and asking for money. I think that's the easy part. What I really like to do is be able to take that ED and turn them into a development officer, and turn their staff into development officers, because I really come out of a sort of a mindset that says everybody plays a role in development
Yes,
in
they,
every organization.
yes, they do. Hmm. Yeah.
And that's where I think that if you can convince the ED to really understand what the eight principles about, then you can design and tailor an eight principles course for that organization. I think the hardest part of that is convincing the ED or the board that they will benefit from it, and that it's a worthwhile investment.
Okay.
That takes more work than going out and soliciting a donor.
Uh, oh, yes. Yes. It's understanding, number one, that fundraising really isn't about money, number one.
Right.
And number two, everyone in an organization, and I do mean everyone, has a role to play. Sometimes a very different role. I may have told you this story, Hillel. I've told it to a lot of people. It just happened last summer. There's a billionaire in a small town in Montana. Uh, it's a known person. You probably even know the name. It's the town he lives in is about 5,000 people. And when you're that kind of person in a town of 5,000 people, it's hard to get lost. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a known person. All right. So, and this happened last summer. He made a call to a local nonprofit who I forget exactly what it was, but it was something he was really interested in supporting. So he makes the phone call to and the gal answers the phone, and he asks to speak to the executive director, and he identifies himself by name, Hillel, so we know who he is. And she says, "Oh, Mr. Smith, thank you for calling. Julie's really busy right now. She'll get back to you later in the fall once we've had our gala." Okay, okay. Now there you go, right there. If that gal had been, enlightened, whatever, that her role was to be very focused and deliberate when potential investors made a phone call, and knowing how to treat them, you know, it would have been something a little different, such as, "Oh, Mr. Smith, thank you for calling. Julie's in a staff meeting, but she'll call you back this afternoon. What number should
Right.
we use? What's the best number for you?" And so, very different. So that when opportunity comes knocking, you're ready for it. You understand the role. Here's something that I said to a guy the other day who's been in business for a long time, Hillel, and he recently founded a nonprofit that he's very passionate about. But he was saying to me, Larry, I'm having a hard time raising money, and it's a very well-meaning cause. I said, "How is that, John?" He said, "Well, I'll go to these networking events and I'll do this and I'll hand out my card and I tell them about the great work we're doing, and it just falls flat." And I said, "Well, let me give you a little perspective here. A lot of nonprofits think their customers are the people they serve. No, 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 no. Their customers are the investors. The people they serve are the beneficiaries." Very different.
Right.
And when I said that, hello, this man just went boom. It's like, oh, I now I
Right.
get this. Now he could shift his businessman perspective, that he knew how to approach people who would potentially invest in his organization. And it was just that big shift. And I think although I've never seen it quite so sudden but this guy being in business, I think understood the difference between a customer and a beneficiary pretty quickly. And it was like, oh, wow. Wow.
The light bulb went off.
Oh, it did. And then since then, it's been only a couple of weeks. He's like, "I'm having so much fun now. People
Yeah.
are all over me wanting to know how they can help." And it was all because how he changed his mental outset. Very good, very good.
It reminds me of an experience, Larry. One year we we decided, my former boss, who has since passed away, came to me, on a ride home, because we used to frequently drive into um, to Boston together when the office was downtown. And he said, we need to change the jargon of the organization. And he said, um, we're going to go meet with this young guy, and I want you to listen to our discussion, because we're going to ask him if he would be willing to become part of what is really a next generation Sons of Bosses program, but we're not going to call it that. And he said, but we're going to do an 8-month education program with a scholar in residence that culminates in a 10-day mission to Israel. And
Wow.
I said, great. And he said, I want you to staff this program after you listen to what Steve has to say. So I go, I listen. One of the greatest pieces of advice this person ever gave me was, less is more, listen, don't talk. And and so I go, we listen, and we recruit this young man to be one of the co-chairs of the program. And we call it, in Hebrew, it's called Acharai. The program still exists in Boston, means after me. And we recruit 20 young men. In those days, it was all men, quickly changed 2 years into the program. And we did this whole thing. We had a scholar in residence who taught. He came from a good friend of mine who has also since passed away, named Leonard Fine. And we did this whole program. And the first thing this young man said, and I'll tell you his name in a minute, and he said, they were in the envelope stationery business in the East Coast, although he came from an investment background. And he said, why do you call everybody donors and contributors? Why not call them investors? Because they're investing in the community. This was in I'm looking around and seeing, this was probably in 1981, 82. We were having this discussion. And maybe it was even earlier. If I can think about, maybe it was 76 during the blizzard, because we came back to a blizzard. They had to do 10 solicitations as part of the program. And this young man, who became the national chairman of the Democratic National Party, and Steve said to us, we're going to change the whole jargon in the organization. And we're going to talk to people about investing in the community and building community. And that changed the whole outlook, because instead of going and saying to people, last year you gave $20,000, and we'd like you to increase that this year to help us meet our needs by 20%. And he said, how about if we ask people to consider a commitment of X amount of dollars that would help us increase services to our beneficiaries? And would they consider a 20% increase if possible? Change the whole mindset, and so we developed a cadre of solicitors who were trained to speak and talk that way. and we literally videotape those people learning how to do that.
Well, Hillel, you were so far ahead of the bulk of the fundraising community. I mean, I didn't even come across that way of thinking until probably the mid 90s or the end of, toward the end of the 90s. That's, you were ahead of the game.
Yeah, it made a whole difference. The funny thing is, we solicited Steve when we did his solicitation. We were sitting in I can picture it to this day, and we were in those days for this program. This was a fully subsidized program. Participants didn't have to pay to go, and so we were sitting in the chairs suite in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, and in those days, you not only did you drink, but many of the people were smokers, and we smoked, right?
Yeah.
And we're sitting and we're drinking scotch, and we're asking Steve about what he thought his family's commitment might be that this year, and would they consider. And he said, well, I need to speak to Edgar, his dad. And he said, let me get him in the phone, but I'm only going to do it if you promise no more scotch and to stop smoking. And he said, because the smoke in the room was too heavy. We did actually close his commitment later. On the mission, and he became not only a campaign chair and a past president of the organization, but a quintessential leader. And he brought those same notions to the Democratic National Committee. And he now runs, and actually his kids are now running that business, and he runs a philanthropy called Building a Better Boston,
Okay.
and is still involved and doing wonderful things. And he and I share a birthday, so we communicate at least once a year on our birthdays
All right.
and send each other messages. But I handwrite notes, so I handwrite Steve a birthday card every year,
Well,
and
I still
and
do some of that. Wow. This has been terrific, Hillel. Here's one thing I learned today, that the whole concept of investment has been around much, much longer than the current push toward it. And it's good to hear from you to do that. It really is.
I think we learned so much from volunteers and and
Oh, yes.
and and people who think about that. And if we take, if you go all the way back to about how we build campaigns and build relationships, and actually, um, and I'll share one last thing. The people who actually are the best at that, in my opinion, some of the best people I know who do that are women.
But yes, well, they're
Because,
relational.
because right, because men tend to do it and think about it from a business relationship and a business perspective, and women do it from the heart.
Yes, they do. Yes. Yes.
And so if you listen to the way the women will talk to each other when they do a solicitation, and so I'll tell you um, one great last tidbit. A colleague and I were going down to see a person that I knew in Attleboro, Massachusetts. If you've ever been to Attleboro, it's not much to think about. It's a tough community on the border. Probably 5 miles from the Massachusetts Rhode Island border. So Beth and I are driving down to Attleboro to see this guy, And I knew him because he was a donor when I was at Combined Jewish Philanthropies, and he was a significant donor because of things that had transpired in his life. And we're talking about what we're going to discuss with him. And he was actually a Brandeis parent. And but we knew that he was philanthropic, and he was on the board of a Catholic university in Newport, Rhode Island, by the name of Salve Regina,
Yes.
and and nice little school. And so my colleague says, let's ask Irving what's given him the most joy in all the things he's done philanthropically. So we walk in and we're sitting there, and he's in the shoe business. He private labels for discounters and stuff, but he makes McGregor golf shoes as well. And so we have this nice little introduction, and Irving and I are talking about this wonderful trip we had gone on together. And he says, so I've got about an hour to spend with you guys and to talk about making a commitment. And my colleague says to him, Mr. Wiseman, you and I haven't met, but I know, what Hillel's told me about you and that you're a real philanthropist and very generous. What's given you the most joy? She used a Yiddish word that we knew he would appreciate. And while that set off a discussion that lasted 3 hours, he brought in lunch, called his wife and said, Mickey, you've got to come in to the factory. And he called two of the kids up from wherever they were, and ultimately led to us going to Florida because he had a place in Palm Beach and closing an endowed scholarship. It took 2 years till he had to pay off other commitments, but ultimately ended up being and I didn't quite have the pleasure of closing the gift because I let that pleasure go to the president of the university because we had set it up so that he would close the gift along with a trustee who they shared a slip at the marina together. And so Dick Burgle, who was at the time the past president of Target stores in Minneapolis or wherever they were headquartered, but was a retailer, and Irving was sitting with the president and closed a $600,000 commitment.
See, I want to go back to something you said. I want us to finish with this. It was the question that was asked. We know you're philanthropic and have been for quite a while. What is it that has brought you the greatest joy? And then you listened and responded to that. That's a lesson I want everyone who's listening today to really, really allow themselves to think about that. How do you really elicit the real meaning of what you're trying to achieve? What brings you the greatest joy? Thank you, Hillel. That's quite a story, and I'm going to use that again and again. Thank you for your time today, Hillel. We're coming up on Hanukkah pretty soon, and a happy Hanukkah to you.
Thank you.
We will talk again, sir. You know where to find us, and we know where to find you. And thank you for being an advocate for the 8 principles. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I should have, if you could see where I'm sitting.
Oh yeah, your vest.
My vest is here because whenever I walk out the door, depending on the weather, that's the first thing I wear.
All right, sir. Thank you.
So thank you. This has been a lot of fun. And I think that what the 8 principles is all about, Larry, is really what we're all about. It's building relationships.
It is. Thank you, sir, very much.
All right. Have a great day.
Thank you. Ladies and
Take
gentlemen,
care.
we're talking to Hillel Korin, who's the principal at Korin Associates, and he lives in beautiful Phoenix, and it's nice and warm down there. And we thank him. The next week, I think there'll be another episode that'll be scheduled, and we look forward to seeing you again.